Ukraine is up to something. Well, actually, three things, which is an interesting coincidence. You see, symbols of war are ubiquitous. On a practical level, they help armies avoid tragic cases of friendly fire. On a less tangible level, they are also the visual representation of a rallying cry. For the invasion of Ukraine, Russia adopted the letter Z. For the invasion of Russia, Ukraine adopted the triangle. However, an alternative way to see it is as a delta, the Greek equivalent of the letter D, but also a common shorthand among mathematicians for change, as in an operation designed to change the direction of the war. But it is also fitting because there are three lines-on-maps-based reasons why the Kursk offensive could swing bargaining power in favor of Ukraine. Thus, today, we will discuss each of them: a shift in the military balance, destabilization of the Kremlin, and raising Russian costs, and put them in the broader context of the war. Oh, and we will also touch on big bridges, nuclear power plants, and the major signals that Russia has sent by building new trenches, which has somehow escaped the Western media conversation. Plus, we will get to that detailed map of what Ukraine is trying to do operationally. But we begin with the military balance, as that is the most straightforward strategic prong. In a classic lines-on-maps setting, the motivation here is to shift the war's expected outcome to the right. That is, Ukraine figured out a new strategy that will ultimately leave it in a better military position once the offensive is over. Now, how exactly Ukraine plans to do this is a mixture of big-picture strategic thinking, a geopolitical media campaign, and low-level operational choices. The big-picture part is well known. Following modest gains during its summer 2023 offensive, Ukraine has been losing ground on its eastern flank going all the way back to November, and the pace of Russian advances has not slowed since then. Indeed, it is a steady trickle at basically all of the main pressure points, with the salient growing out of Avdiivka having been the most rapid. However, Ukrainian forces are notably still holding Chasiv Yar, which holds the high ground above the sizable targets of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Yes, the pace of Russian casualties is questionable. But if that is not going to solve Ukraine's military problem via political problems created inside of Russia, Ukraine needs something to change here. Remember, Russia has been on the offensive in the region for about 9 months, and its push still has not culminated. And we do not yet know whether Ukraine's Kursk pivot will succeed in this task. That will depend on Moscow redeploying troops from the area to assist in the defense. There are rumors that this is happening, but whether this is to an extent that will materially affect the Eastern Front is unclear. Russia's most experienced units are there, so it makes sense that at least a handful would go north to act as de facto leadership, and make sure that the inexperienced border troops do not make basic mistakes, like lining up in a convoy that begs for HIMARS to rain down missiles on top of them, at least as long as HIMARS can operate in the region. At the same time, Russia seems to be hoping that a combination of conscripts and National Guard will do the job. And even if the ad hoc counterforce can only stem the bleeding, the proper comparison is whether Ukraine's forces could have made a greater impact if they were simply stationed in the east. Now to the political side of things. Here, Ukraine has essentially made a sales pitch. Skeptical Western politicians worry that aid dollars to Ukraine are not providing a good enough return on investment. Indeed, there has been a healthy amount of skepticism for years, specifically regarding Ukraine's capacity. Whether we are talking about expectations that Kyiv would fall apart in the invasion's opening week, the apparently incorrect assessment that Ukrainian special forces did not have the reach to destroy the Nord Stream pipeline, or the ability to survive Russia's most recent eastern offensive. The Kursk operation is a way to turn around the media narrative, and it has worked. Ukraine is now back in the Western news, and, for the first time in a long time, in a positive light. In that regard, the offensive has already succeeded, even if Ukrainian troops have to pull out soon. In that light, The off-cited comparisons to the Battle of the Bulge are misleading. This was Germany's last gasp on the Western Front during World War II. It too began with a surprise attack that saw initial successes, but then Allied forces simply clawed back everything. And the lessons of the Battle of the Bulge should serve as a fair warning to Western observers. That is the thing about Uno reverse cards. They can be reversed right back. However, the key difference between the Battle of the Bulge and today is that capturing Kursk is not a war aim for Ukraine. It is a means to an end. Now, obviously, the longer that Ukrainian troops hold the area, the more enthusiasm it will generate among Western supporters. But unless Russia can trap Ukraine and inflict massive casualties, this will remain a political win for Kyiv, regardless of whether the line moves back. Finally, there is the operational part of the offensive. This is harder to judge without actually having access to Ukraine's battle plans. Sadly, neither Moscow nor Kyiv let me see what they are doing. Still, a taste of what might be happening involves rail lines. Bear with me for a second. Ukraine's offensive is coming out of here. Up here is Lvov. It has a railway coming in from the north, and another coming in from the east through Kursk city. From the hub, you can then go to the border to the southwest, or head south to Sudzha. And once in Sudzha, you can travel on southeast to Belgorod city. Now, if we overlay where Ukraine has advanced so far, you start to get a sense of what they might be doing. If you sever the railway here, there is a clear expansion opportunity until you get back to the Ukrainian border. Meanwhile, the railway into Belgorod city is already broken, and it just so happens that Russia's Kharkiv offensive is taking place down here. Note the size differential between the two. Anyway, Russia is far from out of it in Belgorod. As much as Ukraine might want to turn southeast and reclaim all of Kharkiv Oblast, which they seem to be trying, another rail line comes down from Kursk city. Still, that is a lot of pressure to put on a single railway. Oh, and one more thing to keep an eye on. If chaos is the order of the day, now would be the time for Ukraine to attack the Crimean Bridge for the third time. Ukraine has spent the better part of the last year whittling down the Russian Black Sea Fleet, including the vessels that might serve as a backup in case bridge transport is not available. And actually, transport vessels along the Kerch Strait have increasingly become the primary method of transfer. Consequently, targeting them has become somewhat of a prerequisite before even bothering with the bridge. But all of this would first require that Ukraine have a viable attack plan. Now, Russia says that it recently shot down a bunch of ATACMS aimed at the bridge. Who knows whether that is accurate? It would be a little strange because ATACMS are not well suited for that job. But whether Ukraine has an alternative would be a state secret. The second prong of the offensive is to cause political damage in Russia. Visually, this is similar to changing the expected outcome of the war. Although we usually think about military resources as determining where that line falls, a revolution that ends one side's participation can influence it just as much. Along these lines, there are interesting facets to how both sides have played this thus far. Let's start with Russia. We have previously discussed the dilemma that the Kremlin faces between using soldiers from the East and conscripted soldiers currently stationed in Russia. Too long didn't watch. The conscripted soldiers did not volunteer for such duties, and thus putting them into combat roles would be politically risky. Rather, I want to focus on the broader political mood and how the Kremlin's response is shaping it. To understand the logic, we must go all the way back to February 24th, 2022, and Putin's announcement of a special military operation. While the rest of the world laughed at that phrasing, it still guides how Russia fights the war today. Right now, the Kursk invasion has put the Kremlin in a tight spot. Simultaneously, it needs to be sympathetic to the predicament that residents near the border now face, while keeping the appearance that the country is operating under business as usual. You can see this duality front and center on the Kremlin's website in the first week of the invasion. First, a long meeting about relatively benign bureaucratic issues that began with a couple of minutes of reflection that something was happening in Kursk. Then a true meeting focusing on Kursk, featuring the chief of the General Staff Valery Gerasimov stating that the border guard had stopped the enemy's advance. Then an unrelated phone call to Vietnam, a meeting with the Kursk governor, and an all-hands meeting about Kursk. Scroll up. The ceremonial opening of a military-industrial expo, an announcement that Putin would have a meeting with Palestinian representatives, another all-hands meeting about Kursk, then the actual negotiations with those aforementioned Palestinian representatives, and a meeting with the Kaliningrad Oblast governor unrelated to the offensive. Scroll up one more time, a phone call with the president of Uzbekistan, and a meeting with the Tula Oblast governor, also unrelated to the offensive. Heck, Putin is even out of the country on a state visit to Azerbaijan on the 18th and the 19th. I suppose that tells us something about how he feels about his position. It is easier to initiate a coup when the big guy is gone. In sum, the overall theme is that, yes, something is happening, but no, it is not a big deal. Moreover, the problem is not at the federal level. Rather, missteps from local officials created the conditions for the invasion. But now that the Kremlin is on the case, everything will get better in short order. This is a common refrain from Russian politics. It even has the catchy label, "The Good Tsar and the Bad Boyars." Indeed, you can see it in action with the response to the offensive. Did you catch this video of Kursk residents asking for help? It was not, "Putin is a terrible leader. Someone come rescue us." Rather, it was, "We are desperate, and we need Putin's help." There is some evidence of movement here, though. Let's take a look at the social media sentiment scores for Putin leading up to the Kursk invasion, with a 7-day moving average to smooth things. The scale of these is somewhat arbitrary. For now, just focus on the direction of the line. Right before the offensive, Putin took a hit following the prisoner swap with the United States, and was in a period of recovery. Then the incursion began, and it started to plummet. There are 3 important caveats here, though. First, social media tends to skew younger. Second, Russian mainstream media coverage did not see nearly the same kind of drop-off, which makes sense given the Kremlin's control there. Finally, these sentiment scores are still above 0, which represents a neutral sentiment. Until that social media mindset drops further, and then spreads elsewhere, the Kremlin is under no real domestic threat. The problem is that it is now time for Moscow to deliver. You see, a contagion is at risk of forming. There is a lot of border between Russia and Ukraine that is not a part of the normal front lines. Everyone else living in a border town will be watching the response, wondering if they should preemptively evacuate. If the Kremlin cannot reinstill confidence, Ukraine, without lifting a finger, de facto forces Russia to lose more territory, even if it is not going directly in the hands of Ukraine. That said, Kyiv missed an opportunity to control the narrative here. At the beginning of the offensive, there was radio silence from the Ukrainian government about what was happening. This made sense for about the first 24 hours or so, when it was still unclear whether the incursion might just be another simple border raid. Indeed, it was a matter of basic operational security. Do not let the media spoil the plot. However, there was a period after that when everyone knew that this was intended to be something much, much bigger, but Kyiv remained quiet. Consequently, for civilians in Kursk, there was no counter-programming from the Kremlin's narrative. Now, that has changed in the meantime. With the ban lifted, Ukrainians started leaving reviews of local Kursk restaurants, with some mixed opinions. Meantime, Kyiv set up a hotline and began offering aid to those in need. If Ukraine wants to sow the seeds of doubt about the Kremlin's administration, it will have to follow through on those promises. For now, it is telling that we have not yet heard of major uprisings against Ukrainian forces. Finally, we have the third prong of Ukraine's strategic goals: cost imposition. The costlier war is for a party, the further it pushes back the opponent's red line, the better outcomes you can force him to accept. That is straightforward in theory, but can get more complicated in practice. Holding land hostage is not how we would normally think of a cost. It is not the same as accruing casualties, nor is it quite the same as burning money. But it is an opportunity cost. It is something that Russia cannot use as long as Ukraine holds it. Moreover, the effects extend beyond what Ukraine controls. Those people evacuating elsewhere along the border do not just represent a political liability. It is also wasting the value of that land. Meanwhile, if the push continues further to the northeast, Russia may have to consider proactively putting the Kursk nuclear power plant into shutdown. Some of the reporting on this has been confusing, so let's take a moment to cover exactly what is happening there. In total, the plant has 6 reactors. There are 2 VVER reactors currently under construction, which will be the next generation of the model that is found in Zaporizhia. Then you have 2 active RBMK reactors. They are the main dangers at the moment. If that name sounds familiar, it is because RBMK is the same design as Chernobyl, though thankfully they have received some safety modifications over the decades. And then there are 2 RBMK reactors that have been in shutdown. This is where there is ambiguity in the reporting. To make things clear, the shutdown decision had nothing to do with the war. All of the RBMK reactors have reached the end of their life cycles, and mercifully are in the process of being phased out. According to the IAEA, the Kursk 1 reactor turned off in December 2021, while the Kursk 2 reactor said goodnight in January of this year. Meanwhile, the sunsets for 3 and 4 are scheduled for 2033 and 2035, respectively. For now, though, the plant provides critical power not only to Kursk, but to surrounding oblasts as well. If Russian authorities wager that fighting nearby is not worth risking a greater calamity, then all of that power may come off of the grid. If so, then that is another cost that Russia pays every day that the war continues. But zooming out, to trade Kursk for a better deal, Ukraine first needs the ability to hold it, and to resist Russian counterattacks. You cannot fulfill a trade if you do not possess the thing that you are offering. Otherwise, the practical, direct effect of the incursion will be a sunk cost to Russia, and not further influence the Kremlin's thought process. After the first few days, the general consensus was that holding it would be infeasible. But then Ukraine pushed further, and Russia did something telling. Moscow has ordered the digging of trenches far away from where Ukraine currently is. This signals 3 pieces of new information to us. 1. Russia does not think that Ukraine plans to leave. 2. Russia does not think it will be able to expel Ukraine easily. And 3. Ukraine may still have land left to take. It is a reasonable premise that if any of those were false, then Russia would not be paying substantial costs to ruin the land and build trenches there. But they are building those trenches, and thus via our friendly rule of logical inference modus tollens and De Morgan's replacement rule, they must all be true. Remember when logic was all I did on this channel for like a year? Good times. On Ukraine's side, it is unclear whether this was part of the original plan. The strategy may have been, let's go in and see what happens. But Kyiv definitely had it ready as a contingency. Ukrainian troops quickly brought in earth movers and mines. While the latter would also be a good idea to cover a withdrawal, the former only makes sense if you plan to build trenches. One other interesting facet about the timing of the offensive is rain. Mud season may only be a couple of months away. That puts a time crunch on Russia. If it cannot expel the Ukrainian invaders soon, it will become much more difficult to do so thereafter. And that will give Ukraine more time to enhance its own entrenchments, creating a deeper challenge thereafter. So there you have it, the 3 prongs of Ukraine's offensive. Whew. You know, it makes me feel inadequate, because I only have 2 books on the war. Maybe there'll be a 3rd one after it ends, who knows. For now, you can check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.